I finally got the chance to play SIFU, a game that I've been excited to get my hands on since its first announcement. It didn't meet my expectations, it far exceeded them. This is my SIFU review. Now SIFU isn't just a fighting game, but an engrossing lesson in risk versus reward. It's a stylish single player action brawler where every punch, every kick, block, parry and dodge matters. It's a thinker too, not too dissimilar from games such as Devil May Cry. There's a lot to wrap your head around at first, and this isn't the kind of action game where you can just dodge and roll around your problems or parry your way to victory. Even when you're up against low health minions, you need to consider the spacing, combos and environmental hazards. Incoming blows can be high or low. You try to evade the wrong one and you'll get clipped, simply put. SIFU doesn't pull any punches and I love it for it. SIFU handles death and failure in a very unique and interesting way. In SIFU, you see, every time you die, you age. With each death, a death counter jumps up a notch, meaning your next demise might cost you 2 years, 3 years or 4, maybe even more depending on how many times you've slumped to the asphalt. With age, you become stronger, but you have less vitality. And while there are a few ways to slow the hands of time, the most obvious happens in real time, where you juggle your tactics on the fly, where you commit to offense and defense as each melee encounter dictates. One area of SIFU I feel goes unappreciated is its story and characters. The story has a heavy base of morality, and I don't want to go too much into it in case you decide to pick up the game yourself in the future and you can experience it firsthand. I love the way the game gives you its information on the detective board and you build up to the boss's characters through the environmental storytelling of their respective levels. It may not be the most engaging story for a lot of players, but if you really pay attention and look for the pieces that the game gives you, it's one of the most rewarding ones in recent memory. Now I played SIFU on a PS5 and it feels great to play at a super smooth 60 frames per second, alongside tight controls and some well implemented DualSense functionality. The haptics are used to a pleasing effect here, with subtle vibrations, adding weight to each strike, block and parry, and even some environmental effects as well. What really elevates SIFU is its often stunning art direction. It starts out quite drab as you rampage your way through gang-infested apartment blocks, but later stages incorporate shockingly abstract visuals and vibrant colours. It blossoms into a feast for your eyes, a game that's almost as gratifying to watch as it is to play. You're also not just walking into a room and fighting random people. They're always doing their own thing before you rudely interrupt them, whether it's backroom gambling, an illegal cage fight, or even sitting about drinking. It all feels authentic. On a similar note, there's also sometimes can be very small dialogue sections between fights that can be surprisingly impactful. Sometimes you can even avoid fights or engage in bonus ones. I got a lot out of it as a role-playing tool, since the choices each convey a slightly different personality. I could choose to either be a smooth talker, someone only interested in the facts, or perhaps someone who elects to skip dialogue entirely by smacking whoever's talking in the face. It helps that the levels themselves are excellently designed as you progress through them. You'll find shortcuts to speed you along. Maybe a mini-boss was carrying an access card that lets you use a previously locked off lift, for example. On top of that, the first time you play through a level, you're probably going to get your ass kicked, extending the time it takes. I was 34 years old when I finally managed to beat the first level, but later I cut that down to my early 20s, and you're going to want to be as young as possible going into a new level, purely so you get more opportunities to learn what's coming up ahead and develop the skills you already have. Now, one thing I pointed out in my recent Metal Gear Rising with Vengeance review, one of the standouts for me in the game was the dynamic soundtrack, and SIFU is no different. SIFU has a dynamic soundtrack that suits the style of the game perfectly. A traditional Chinese instruments mixed with modern electronic music to create something unlike anything I've heard. It stood out in the nightclub level where a DJ was performing the music I thought to, but as I went deeper into the level, the music transitioned to a more traditional score as the initial backdrop of the club slowly faded away to the martial arts school hidden away inside. It felt like reality was melting away at the closer I got to the boss's lair. You find yourself fighting to the rhythm of the music, and your punches and kicks elevate the beats in the background and add another layer of immersion when playing through the levels, with each having their own unique soundtrack to accompany their varying visual presentations. The boss fights that you encounter at the end of each stage feel unique and different and are a representation of the level you have fought your way through. The boss fights when you first encounter them can seem extremely punishing as you start to try and anticipate and read the attacks that are thrown your way. And just when you thought you had the fight down, each boss has a second phase to throw your way. Now what is interesting is that you do not have to kill the bosses themselves. Instead, if you break the boss's structure bar not once but twice, you are presented with an option of sparing the boss. Now this is important as the game, as far as I can recall, makes no mention of this, and I only found out on my second playthrough as I was practicing on a boss whilst trying to memorise their moveset for a low age run. By sparing every boss, you'll unlock the true ending of the game, in which the main character discovers Wuda, an ethical system taught in Chinese martial arts which is primarily concerned with the cultivation of inner harmony between the emotional mind and the wisdom mind. The Chinese term Kung Fu roughly translates as a skill acquired through hard work and practice. SIFU might just be the purest expression of the concept of the game I've ever seen. The journey is brutal, it's not for the faint of heart, nor for the short of patience, even on the lower difficulty as in a recent patch. But those who are prepared to rise to the challenge will find that something spectacular comes after the pain. Is it worth the hardship? For me, the answer is a resounding yes. SIFU for me nails everything it sets out to achieve, despite a few niggling issues such as the camera that will decide it wants to do its own thing on you every now and then. It sets itself apart from an industry where uniqueness is few and far between, and easily puts itself ahead as one of the early frontrunners for my favourite game of 2022.